Well, good. Well, good evening. We are glad that you're here tonight. We'd like to welcome each of you to Faith Baptist Church. If you are joining us online, we are live streaming this. So even if you're in person and you want to go back and listen to something again or watch something again, you can find this on our Facebook page, our YouTube page, web page, Faith Baptist Church Meridian. So hopefully this will be a good opportunity. And if you're watching online, we'd encourage you, if you have any questions or anything, please contact our church office and we'll be able to get you the information. You're going to see at the end of the night ways that you can contact and ways that you can help. So please make note of those things. So we are so glad to have representatives with us from the Mississippi Center for Violence Prevention. I got the name correct? So I'm Derek Wilson. I'm the senior pastor here. We are glad you're here. Our restrooms go through that door, and the men's and women's restrooms are there. So in the evening, if you need to use that, they are right there and they are available. I'm going to pray, and then our media team is going to start a video, and we're going to turn things over to these wonderful people that are here with us tonight. So let's pray together. Father, we are grateful to be in your presence. God, as we hear about something that is difficult to hear about but is a major problem, God, I pray that you would bless the work that these people do, and that, God, you would raise up through this night more individuals who are passionate about helping those in this desperate situation. God, we don't know what you will do with tonight, but God, we're grateful to give it to you. And we pray, God, that your hand would be in all of it. Lord, I just ask that you would bless this time. God, help us. Help us to hear clearly from you and to be bold enough to do whatever you've called us. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
The FBI swept through Jackson, rescued more than 100 children.
When some people think of human trafficking, they think of other countries or impoverished
Police
places.
in our state arrested dozens in sex trafficking
An
stings.
undercover operation takes down cases of prostitution in our area.
Human trafficking is happening here in Mississippi. It's like an underworld epidemic. It's something that is creeping into all of our communities.
It's a growing problem, a problem that a lot of people really didn't know was here until we started investigating.
The largest misconception about human trafficking is that it's bondage and interstate travel only. Sex trafficking is profiting from selling the services of sexual favors for anything of value.
You have this image of trailer loaded of Hispanic women coming out of Mexico being brought into the United States, but as time's advanced, I probably saw it through my whole career and didn't know what I was looking at.
Most people probably think that's a problem in New York City or Los Angeles, but the reality is it's right here in our backyard.
Some child advocates call it modern-day slavery. We're talking about human trafficking. It's a growing issue in our state.
Riding Jackson today, Highway 80. Some of the more prominent areas that are known for high traffic, prostitution, drug traffic, stolen firearms, stolen property. Usually one crime's going to lead to the other. This corridor right through here is known for drug trafficking and drug trade. And anytime you have drugs, money, and guns, you're going to have prostitution and girls. And unfortunately, these girls are property. They're forced to commit these sexual acts, these deviants, and in most cases, these girls are abused in every aspect. They're traded like any other type of property or stolen merchandise.
First, the victims, the human trafficking and prostitution charges against 3 people. The sheriff says the 3 adults befriended a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old after the pair left a residential treatment center.
There's usually characteristics about the young lady that the human trafficker is looking for, whether it's low self-esteem or they've previously been abused or literally just don't have any means. That's exactly the kind of woman that he's going to zero in on to try to brainwash, essentially. Most of them started actually in a dating relationship. They met some guy, he tells them all the things they want to hear. He'll shower her with gifts, a lot of flattery, just treat her like she's a queen. That's something that those girls, a lot of times, they're not getting from anywhere else. They're not getting those kind of, no one else is meeting their needs, whether it's for emotional attention or even their physical needs, like a roof over their head or something to eat. So they latch onto that guy really hard, and at that point, he's got them.
Hinds County Sheriff's Office gets tough on prostitution.
10 men, even a woman were picked up.
That area is a hot spot for prostitution.
It all went down on Raymond Road, right on Valley Drive.
Now, in other news, if you've checked social media recently, you may have noticed some warnings about potential human trafficking.
It's easier now because of technology. You can sit at work, on your couch at home. You can get on your computer or on your phone, anything that's got internet access, and access these sites. And a lot of these ads, they will cater to married men. It is definitely easier to get away at work. Take your breaks, take your lunch breaks. If I get in the morning, I'll shotgun some text out. Once they start texting us back, depending on how they progress the conversation, I've had them go within 5 minutes. We had the entire conversation done with the location, the prices, and the just all the terms of it. Matter of fact, that's one right there from this morning. Yeah, because like I said, when I get in the morning, I'll find probably 4 or 5 ads, and I'll text them. And like I said, sometimes they'll text right back. And that one, it said, "Hey, love, this is Jess. You text my number, my 4139 number. I'm unable to text back on that phone. What's up?" So yeah, apparently that's when I text this morning.
Investigators say this man came to the hotel because he thought he was meeting a young girl. A grand jury will consider the charges against all of these men and women, while investigators in Pearl are already planning.
At this point, we have 5 task forces that are working around the state. We have one in Jackson, in the Jackson area. We have another task force in Hattiesburg. We have one in Tupelo. We have one in Batesville, and the other one is in the works on the coast. The task forces include federal, state, and local law enforcement, and so they don't have jurisdictional issues that a lot of times happens when you just call the cops. And the other good thing is that our task forces also receive tips from the Human Trafficking Hotline. And so when people in the community see something and they call, those tips go down to the lead investigators on the task forces. They go out and they find these victims and they arrest the buyers and hopefully they arrest the pimps as well. And then we're right there with them as a victim services agency, so we can assist in screening that victim. And right now we only have one shelter for adult victims in the state, and we have nothing for our children, and that's a real problem that we need to address immediately.
Human trafficking is real. It's here. This is one of the purest forms of evil that I see in what we do every day. And we're going to do everything we can within our power, within our resources, to put an end to it.
I'm Sandy Middleton. I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Violence Prevention, and it's going to be my pleasure in just a minute to introduce the rest of these lovely people that are up here with me tonight. I just first want to express appreciation to this church for making this statement and taking this stand on this issue. Pastor, appreciate you and the leadership team here at the church I know I heard so many of you talking about how many contacts you've made and to the community and how many people you've reached out to. And so regardless of who's here tonight or who's watching on Facebook, as I told the pastor before we started, the people that the Lord means to be here are here. And so we'll take it from there, and we'll enjoy our time together, and hopefully we'll all do what the Lord tells us to do, which is sometimes scary and difficult. So I hope I'm not doing anything wrong with this mic. So to talk just a little bit about the Center for Violence Prevention, we've been in existence. We're a nonprofit that's in the Jackson area, and we have been serving victims since 1990. For a long time, our focus was serving victims of domestic violence, and we also started to serve victims of sexual assault, and we ran an offender program. We still run that program for domestic violence offenders, and Christina was my right hand many years ago, and we love to go to trainings and, kind of stay on the cutting edge of victim services. And so we started hearing probably about a decade ago, maybe a little longer than that, but we started hearing people talk about human trafficking. And so we were both really intrigued, and we started paying attention to some of the victims that we really couldn't understand the relationships that were around them, and so we started to get a little bit more familiar with the ways to identify and screen victims of human trafficking. And once we started that just put everything into overdrive, and we started recognizing, oh wow, that was a victim of sex trafficking, and that was that was what that relationship was. And so it really blew up in a way that just really surprised us. And so we started the tower, and Christina's going to talk a little bit more about the tower when we get to that place. But we've done a lot of work with our law enforcement and the legislature. We've passed a lot of legislation. We passed a whole slate of human trafficking laws, and then came behind that the last few years, and have passed some bills that are really important and really gained the attention of the country, especially with this past bill that we were successful in becoming law, House Bill 1559. So a lot has happened, and it's kind of fun watching that video, because that's about about probably 5 or 6, not that, 3 years ago. Yeah, there's a lot that's happened in 3 years. So there's a lot of cool stories, and, we're going to jump into some of that tonight, but I want to start out by introducing the people here on the stage with me. I've already talked about Christina. This is Christina McCool. Christina runs our Tower program, and which also encompasses our rapid advocacy response to victims across the state. She's got a busy job and does a fantastic job at what she does. And then we've got Casey Hendricks and Philip Hendricks, who I think are really special to a couple of people or maybe 3. Let's not forget Shirley. Raise your hands and let everybody see who you are. And it was a pleasure to meet Philip and Casey's family, and we are just blessed to have them in our family. They are very special people, and they have just brought another level of passion to what we do, and I just love them both dearly, and we're just thrilled and tickled to have them, and you guys did a good job with them. So I'm going to jump in right there, and Philip, let you kind of start talking about yourself and what got you here.
Can y'all hear me okay? My name is Philip Hendricks, and like she said, if that name sounds familiar, it's because my father has the same name, and he's a deacon at this church. So I've been in law enforcement for about 15 years. I started my career at the Forest County Sheriff's Office in Hattiesburg. Did everything there, did patrol, worked narcotics, worked investigations, general investigations. Then sometime around August or September of 2018, I was going to a meeting in the morning with the sheriff and some other of the admin, and I was running late. I got there about 5 minutes late, and the sheriff slid a piece of paper across the desk at me, and he said, well, since you got to the morning meeting last, you have to go to this meeting later today about human trafficking. And so I actually did not know what human trafficking was. When he told me that, I thought I was going to a meeting about human smuggling. I thought I was going to be talking about, a van or a bus full of immigrants. Had no idea that we were going to be talking about, labor trafficking, or then more specifically sex trafficking in Mississippi. And that's when I met Christina and Sandy, and they were, y'all know the story of Johnny Appleseed, where he was going around planting trees. They were kind of like the missionaries of raising, and still are, the missionaries of raising awareness of what's really going on with these women who are victims. And that's another thing I'm going to confess right off the bat. When I met them, they were using these phrases like trauma-informed and victim-centered, and I thought I was this like hardened police officer, tough guy, So I was like, that's the biggest nonsense I've ever heard in my life. I had a very judgmental, not Christ-like attitude about those women. I saw them as substance abusers. I saw them as thieves. I saw them as people who were spreading diseases, more of a problem in our community than somebody that really needed a lot of help so that they could be restored. And these ladies have been super patient with me, because it wasn't like I just got it immediately. It took me months and months of being absorbed to this new way of thinking, and then also meeting real live victims who were victimized a lot of times with sex abuse as children, and then found themselves homeless as teenagers, and really had no choices in life. And I always came from my bias, having lived in a good family and having everything that the world can offer you. My assumption was just they chose this to feed an addiction, not that the addiction was the way the trafficker controlled them, or that maybe they were self-medicating with substance abuse to try to deal with the emotional pain they were experiencing. So, fast forward 4 years now, we have several task forces across the state. About 2 years ago, I left the sheriff's office, and Attorney General Lynn Fitch was starting a human trafficking unit. And at that time, we'd been doing undercover operations with the Pine Belt Task Force for about 2 years, and there were just a few of us, really, police officers, that were really doing that in the state. So they recruited us, and it's been a real privilege and honor to get to travel all over the state and work with federal agencies and local agencies. And then, of course, the most important goal is recovering these girls and getting them in contact with victim services.
And every once in a while, to this day, Philip will lapse back into that cop mentality, and that's when Shirley straightens him out at home. So that's kind of how that works. But no, seriously, it's so much fun to hear these seasoned cops that he's talking about. Now we get to sit in the back of the room and hear them say words like trauma-informed and victim-centered, and Christine and Casey and I are going, yay! So it's really a cool thing. So Casey, your turn.
All right. As she said, my name is Casey Hendricks. I know a lot of you know me. I was a member at Faith for many years, and just really love this church and the amazing people here. So Philip went to the first meeting, and they told him that they were looking for a rapid responder for the Hattiesburg area in the south part of our state. And at that time, I had been working for a nonprofit here, and my grant had ended, which meant my job had ended. And so I was looking for, something to do, and I had previously, while I'd been searching, I knew about human trafficking, and I had looked into other potential jobs related to that, and they just weren't a fit at that time. I didn't feel like they were the right direction to go. And so when he told me about this job, I was like, well, I'll apply and see what happens. And so while I did know a little bit about trafficking, I realized after I got the job, there was definitely a lot I did not know. And I think that, that's just the truth for a lot of us, that sometimes you look on the surface and that's all you see. And so I remember, in fact, several years ago, I was talking to someone from Meridian about prostitution in Meridian, and they told me that there was one prostitute in Meridian and that she was actually out of town in Natchez right then. So obviously, people are missing some things, right? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I do for my job and about identifying victims and screening them. So I work closely with law enforcement, local law enforcement, state, federal officers. I work closely with other nonprofits, with medical professionals, anybody in the community who might interact with a victim and then could connect me to that victim for a screening. What my goal is in that is to go out and meet with this person and find out kind of what their story is, what is going on with them, how did they get there in that moment. And as I talk to them, I'm not looking for them to say, hey, I'm a trafficking victim. Most victims do not know what human trafficking is. And most of them, as they tell the story of how they got to where they are, sometimes even thought they made some choices in that process and didn't know some of the manipulation going on. Sometimes they're actively being manipulated in that moment and the brainwashing. So what I do is I sit down with them. I am listening to them tell their story, and I'm looking for, is there force, fraud, and coercion going on in their life? Are they a victim of sex trafficking? Are they a victim of labor trafficking? And then I'm also looking for what this person wants their life to look like. And that's one of the most important aspects of the job, because I could walk up to any of you and say, hey, I think you should work this job. I think you should live at this place. I think you should, date or marry this person. You should have this many kids. But it's not my choice for you, right? It's your choice for your life and what you want it to look like. And it's not empowering when someone else is making all your decisions for you and controlling you. And a lot of times people aren't successful or happy if they're just living out someone else's dream. And so what I like to do with the victims is to try to find out, what is their dream? If they could, decide what they wanted their life to look like. And then I know about local resources, and I work to connect them to whatever resources they need to be able to achieve their goals for their life. One of those goals is the tower. I know one of those options is the tower. I know Christina's going to talk about that more, but we do have a shelter if that's what they need. If they already have housing, I may be connecting them to rehab or to, employment skills, help them find rides. Excuse me, my throat's closing up a little bit. But just really whatever that victim needs for their life, that is what I'm there to do. Sorry about that, I was probably talking too fast. But a lot of them also have legal troubles. Philip was talking about encountering victims. And so a lot of them have substance abuse problems. And so they may have been arrested on a felony drug charge, and that cop may be the one who called me. So I may be going to the jail to meet with them and to find out, how did they get here, find out if they're interested in rehab. And then I start advocating for them. And in the past, I've had victims that the cops they called me about this one lady, and they said, I'm going to have you come meet with her because I think she might be a victim, but I really don't have any hope of anything changing for her. We've known her for years. She's, heavily addicted, always committing crimes in our community. I really don't know if she'll want any help. And I went and met with her, and she was a victim, and she was interested in going to rehab. And so I talked to that officer who had this drug charge on her, and I said, hey, do you think we can push court back so that she could go to rehab and get sober and get some therapy and get some help? And he agreed to do that. And then she was successful at rehab. The rehab has a transitional living program. She did that program, was very successful with that, got a job when she was done. And she hasn't always stayed in touch with me because she doesn't really need me anymore. But she stays in touch with him because he was the one that had the charge on her. And so he will tell me randomly, he'll say, you know, I heard from her and she's doing really great. And I never would have believed that would have happened. And so I want to tell you a little bit about, you know, some of the vulnerabilities of victims. Philip touched on that briefly, but addiction is a huge vulnerability. People, you know, previously to working with these victims, when I thought of drugs and people who were drug addicts, I thought of it as more of a party lifestyle. I feel like a lot of times in TV shows and the media, that's how it's portrayed, that people are just, you know, going out to a rave and popping some pills or whatever, and they just want to escape and have fun. And I remember thinking, like, you know, these people, instead of escaping, they should just make different life decisions so they could live the life they actually wanted, right? Because I wasn't going through what they were going through, and it sounded easy to me. And as I've worked with these victims who are mostly drug addicted, it's very rare to find a victim that's not. I realize that these ladies are not doing these drugs because they think they're fun. They're not doing these drugs to party. They're doing drugs because they have things in their life that are so terrible that they want to forget them. And a lot of them, it's traumas that started when they were younger. You know, a population that is vulnerable to human trafficking is people who've previously experienced sexual abuse, physical abuse, you know, emotional abuse at home, things like that. That group is very vulnerable to trafficking. I've had clients who their parents kicked them out of the home because they disagreed with decisions that they made as kids. And and other kids who they were foster kids and they ran away, and their foster parents didn't even report them missing. They were glad they were gone. And so statistics have shown that within, you know, I think it's like 24 hours of being on the streets, a kid is likely to be approached by a trafficker. And it's not hard to spot people who are homeless, right? We see them all the time. And traffickers, they know what they're looking for. They know how to spot vulnerable people. So homeless people, you know, whether it's a kid or an adult, runaways, missing children, kids that have experienced prior abuse. Another vulnerable population is people who are undocumented immigrants in our country. They are very vulnerable to exploitation. They don't have the same paperwork they had. They don't usually speak the language. They don't know how to exercise the rights that they do have. And so that's really easy for people to come across them and start taking advantage of them. Anyways, we'll talk more about that, but that is basically what I do. Is I meet with them, I screen them, I look for vulnerabilities, I look for, you know, what they're interested in, and I offer them help. And I try to stay in touch with them so that they know they can always reach out. Even if, you know, we had a short-term goal and we've met that, they can know they can call me later if something goes wrong or if they have another new goal that they want some help achieving.
Thank you, Casey. So before we delve into the tower, I want to recognize Keisha Tyson in the back. Keisha, you want to wave or stand up? So Keisha is another one of our rapid response advocates. It's actually assigned to the Central Mississippi area. And Keisha's back there at the table where we have all sorts of information. If there's anything you want to go by and pick up afterward or talk to Keisha, she is another hero that's out on the road at night, and just like Casey and others who are trying to help victims. So Christina, jump in and let's talk about the tower.
So the tower is specialized long-term recovery for survivors of human trafficking. Let me see if this is better. Okay, there you go. Thank you. So it's specific. I'm sorry. It's specific for victims of human trafficking, and so let me train.
Christina doesn't usually have this much trouble working the microphone. You got it?
I think I got it. Maybe it's my voice. Okay. So when we started, when Sandy and I were working domestic violence and everything else, we brought victims into the domestic violence shelter because that's what we did, right? We saw someone who was a victim of domestic violence and also oftentimes victims of sexual violence. And so doesn't that fit into what we do? And wouldn't that be a good solution, right? But we found out very quickly that they needed something much more. They didn't need the 30-day or short-term emergency shelter. They needed specialized services. They needed longer-term recovery and care. They needed understanding of really what was going on. And so we were privileged enough to be able to open in 2017. And so it's a long-term recovery program. So it's up to 2 years for victims. And, you know, for complex trauma, it is a long process, and it looks different for everybody to recover. Having to get a job immediately is very difficult for survivors of trafficking for multiple reasons. Number one, you know, my value has been associated with this other act. And when I get paid, even though I don't keep that money, it's a lot more than that check that I'm getting from working, you know, 20 or 30 hours at McDonald's. So it's very triggering for them, you know, and so I can't survive on that. And that triggers a panic. And so it's, you know, the brain can't settle down and adapt because I'm just surviving. I have to figure out how to survive the next 30 days, you know, and after that. So, you know, we focus on the trauma recovery in the program. We have all kinds of resources. We have EMDR for the therapist in the room, you know, DBT, and then trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. We do animal-assisted therapy. We get to go to equine. We have a therapy dog that is in and around the shelter. We have, you know, constant groups. We go to churches that have Celebrate Recovery programs or AA meetings and NA meetings and things like that. But mostly we have a community of people with shared experiences. So I'm not the oddball. I'm not the one that's so different in the room. I have people in the room that look like me, that have similar life experiences as me, and I can heal in an environment that feels safe and comfortable. And you know, it's a very special place. I mean, I've got a fantastic team. We've got 2 full-time bilingual staff. So we, you know, we're able to respond effectively to people who at least speak Spanish. Now, that's becoming a little, you know, shaky right now because we're getting victims from other Latin American countries that speak something other than Spanish. So we thought we were strong with 2, but we may need to expand that. But anyway, the shelter itself houses up to 20 people. You know, it's something that is always evolving and growing. We believe in evidence-based practicing. We are not an agency or a shelter that plans our programming based on what feels good and what we think will work. We want to know what has worked. We want to look at the research. We want to know why it works. We want to know kind of what is behind that, and then how can we facilitate it effectively so that we can have the best possible outcomes. We have had a number of survivors who've come into the shelter who have had experiences in other programs that were not evidence-based, and it is another added trauma. It is more distance away from recovery because how can I trust you? It's very detrimental. So we believe in evidence-based programming. there's not a whole lot of research for specific human trafficking programming because, hey, look, this is, like Sandy said, we're on the cutting edge of things, really. And so, we've been researching and working toward this since 2011. And, when you really think about researched evidence-based programs, we're just now really understanding kind of what the issue is well enough to be able to really delve into evidence-based programming for human trafficking. But we've got a pretty good idea of what works. And so that's kind of what we implement there. We're always assessing. We're always inviting our residents to participate in that assessment and get to choose and say, hey, look, this is what's working for me. This is what's not working for me. Because they're part of the process. Their voice should be heard, and it should be first, really. That's really why any of us are there. And so it's a privilege to operate that shelter. It's a privilege to be able to have the rapid response team in the state to work with the amazing law enforcement, which, by the way, has made the biggest difference in our state. The reason why we've been able to pass the legislation that Sandy has spearheaded is because of the work of these people on the ground. We don't get to show you the people that are in the shelter, nor would we want to. We don't want to exploit them and tell their stories. But the people on the ground that are getting into the nitty-gritty, that are meeting people in their darkest hour and meeting that need, feeding them a sandwich, getting them some clothing, rescuing them from a dangerous situation, providing options, those numbers have accumulated over the course of the years that we've been doing this, and the state has recognized that. This is a problem. This is in this community. You don't know how many nights Keisha and I drive to Meridian from Jackson, how many nights we are here and till 2 or 3 in the morning to respond to your kids, your children, your peers, the people that you probably may never even know what's going on. And it's a problem throughout the state. And I appreciate the opportunity to kind of share a little bit about what has been done, what we are doing, and what you can do.
Thank you, Christina. A couple of things to add to that. At the tower, we also allow or encourage the clients that come in to bring their children. A lot of times when they come in, they don't have custody of their children. And as us mamas know that, our kids are so important to our lives and our recovery that we work real hard on that. And then we also have them to bring their pets. We've had big dogs, little dogs, all kinds of different pets, and I'll tell you a cool story to talk a little bit about what Christina said about law enforcement. There was an operation or sting, or whatever you want to call it, that law enforcement was doing, and a victim was pulled out of a really dangerous situation, and our law enforcement guys were there. We call them our guys because they are. They're with us so much, and so the girl came out and she was really upset. She just kept saying, my dog, my dog's still in there. I want to get my dog. And our law enforcement guys strapped up, went back into that dangerous situation to get that dog for that girl. And, I want to just, Philip, I want to throw it back to you, when we're talking about what did that mean and why was that important, and to talk about the efforts to build trust and rapport, and just talk about some of that and how it relates to the way you interact with victims.
Well, I'm sure with the situation with the dog, that was probably the only other living thing in the world that probably gives her unconditional positive regard no matter what's going on. It's never judgmental of her. So I'm sure for her emotional support, the dog was very important. A lot of the victims that I encounter, it's when we'll do an undercover operation, we'll have someone pose as a sex buyer, and they'll contact a phone number that's published online, and then we'll end up encountering the woman in a hotel room or something. And when we walk in, usually one of the first things we tell them is, look, we're not here to judge you. We're not here to embarrass you. We're not here to arrest you. We try our very best not to arrest anyone that is a victim, and we go in with the presumption that anyone we encounter under those circumstances is going to be a victim. Now, if there's a pimp controlling them elsewhere on the property, it's a different thing for him. But as far as the girls themselves, what we try to tell them right off the bat is, look, we're going to take you to meet these really nice ladies. They're going to tell you about this whole range of services. Sometimes we'll ask them, hey, when was the last time you got checked for STDs? There's going to be a sane nurse there on scene who will do all that for you absolutely free of charge. And I think there's a little bit of distrust. Well, there's a lot of distrust. A lot of times they're from a background where possibly their parents were going to jail, or their pimp has told them, hey, all the police want to do is put you in jail or me in jail. So we kind of make them all these promises right off the bat, and then we immediately deliver on them. We drive them. They meet with the advocates. They meet with the sane nurse, and that's kind of the first step in building that trust. I think they don't until they start experiencing I did get checked for STDs for free. I was told about housing that I could have at no cost. I was told about a therapist, or wow, there's somebody who's going to help me get my GED, or help me find a job. So I think all of that, keeping our word right off the bat, and we try not to handcuff them or do anything like that. It's all about building rapport and trying to set the stage for the next step.
And that was a major change for law enforcement. Because just a few months earlier, as a matter of fact, one of the other investigators that we work with, there's a funny story about what happened with him, and that kind of goes back to Christina, what you were saying a minute ago about exploiting victims. And so I want to get you to talk about that just a minute, but she stated that we don't push our clients out to give their stories, and we don't share their pictures and all of that, and there's several reasons why we don't do that, and primarily it's about respect. And when somebody's going through a real hard time in their life, or they're in a crisis situation, really the last thing they want to have happen is to just be that person that everybody labels and remembers for the rest of their lives as a dopehead or a prostitute or whatever. And so, it's really important to us and to the recovery of the victim that we respect that. Christina, talk a little bit more about that.
Well, before they're a victim, they're a person, and I'm a person of faith, and so I believe that they're created in the image of God, and they're an image bearer. So before they're a victim, they're a person, and so we treat them with the dignity and respect that we all deserve. We don't look at their circumstances and decide what they deserve, because that's just not right. And so, I think that whenever we are working with survivors, people with this experience, I think you have to start with that lens, and then understand what's going on in their experience and in their brain, in their biology. And when we deal with mental health issues, obviously we've talked about addiction and trauma and things like that. And so that can present in ways that are not real lovely, right? That can present, how many times in Philip's career, I imagine they have been combative and abusive, because that's how they responded. And especially if they are in that survival mode, if they're biologically and they're in that survival mode, the way that the brain works is that they're not thinking with their prefrontal cortex. They're not up here thinking rationally that this person is here to help me. Because isn't that what we think? We think, why? Now, they were given that opportunity to be saved, and why didn't they take it? Well, because they're operating in that survival mode, and so it's not a rational place. And so what we have to do is try to kind of alleviate some of the stress, some of the anxiety. We have to start, providing some stabilization and some regulation so that we can talk to that prefrontal cortex, that rational part of the brain, and in order for them to get back to, thinking about, what is my dream? It's like that question in the middle of a crisis is like, are you kidding me? My dream is to get out of here right now. You gonna open the door? So it can get tricky, but I think it's really important how we approach and what our mindset is about who this person is, not to come in with predetermined kind of thoughts about who they are and what they need.
And we believe, too, that victims, we need to hear them. We've already talked a little bit about how we listen to them in informing our programming, and we listen to them when it comes to what they want out of their lives. And at the same time, we have a survivor of human trafficking on our board of directors, which puts that person in a position of a policy-making role, and to give that power and that voice to a survivor is really big. And, there are always victims who are survivors who go through all of their recovery and, down the road decide, well, I want to tell my story. But, we want to wait, and that's what client-centered means. I mean, we want to wait until their recovery is complete and they're healthy and whole. And then if they decide they want to share their story, then they get to determine what that looks like. So I want to switch gears a little bit now. I don't want to go back over some of the things that were in the video about, what is human trafficking. There are a lot of terms that are used to describe human trafficking. You'll hear it called modern-day slavery. I want to get each one of you to maybe tell me a myth. And while y'all are thinking about a myth, of course, we hear a lot of urban rumors and whatnot about what human trafficking is. And one of the most recent things, I'll kind of start off while y'all are thinking, and y'all are probably all going to be thinking the same one. But right now, what we're seeing is the zip tie on the door handles. Have y'all seen that? Everybody's getting real worked up about, oh my goodness, there's a zip tie on my door handle of my car. That means I'm marked for trafficking. And so, not only is that not helpful to share that sort of, I hesitate to use the word misinformation. It's gotten so political. But anyway, it's really not helpful when these rumors get spread around, and I don't know why it seems to work for people. I think in our minds, if all we have to do is to stay safe from human trafficking is just not get in our car when we have a zip tie on the handle, maybe that makes it easy for us and we feel safe. I don't know. Surely we could discuss that at another time. So jump in, y'all, and tell us a myth.
Well, I know recently in Meridian, I saw some posts going around about kind of broken cinder blocks put behind tires. Did y'all see those on Facebook? It happened, I know, at the Crossroads and I think at a few other stores around town. And I kept seeing all these people sharing, I'm like, is this human trafficking and all this stuff? And I don't know what that was. Like, to be honest, I don't know what that was. It was weird. I don't know if somebody was playing a prank or if it was some criminal thing. They wanted to rob somebody or something else. But that's not human trafficking. Human trafficking is, exploiting someone, using force, fraud, or coercion to do that. And it's very specific what it is. And, what we see a lot of times is more of a grooming process. It's someone that they know. It's not, a stranger waiting to kidnap you because they put, broken cinder blocks behind your car and you can't back up. So that one's kind of specific to Meridian, but I thought I would share.
Well, instead of, instead of talking about a specific internet myth like the dots on the windows, the myth that I've encountered the most, whether I was talking to a group of citizens or whether it was a police chief in a town, the thing that I have heard over and over again is, I believe that's a serious problem, but it's not a problem that we have in our town. And so one of the things that when we teach our class now, one of the first things when it's my turn to teach and I get up, I pull up one of the websites where men go to find women to contact. And I just show them, if you click on Mississippi, there are 17 different places that automatically pop up on the map. Those are 17 cities that, and some of them are as small as little bitty Woodville, Mississippi, 17 that have so much internet traffic for prostitution that they actually have their own little subheading under Mississippi. And then if you were to type in the name of your town, whether you had your own little heading or not, you're going to see ad after ad after ad. So the myth I would address is, the person who thinks that problem isn't in their town.
There's numerous myths. There's the white van myth. There's, that's somehow or another when the conversation started about human trafficking, all the things that we've heard for years about kidnappings got attached to human trafficking. So there's the white van myth. There's the human smuggling myth that's what human trafficking is. But that's not what it is. And you hear us talk about prostitution, or you hear Philip talk about prostitution because that's a crime. But what we're talking about when we talk about people who have been prostituted are people who have been either prostituted as children, that is human trafficking, or if they have been prostituted through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. So if somebody has coerced them either by using drugs or threats of violence or manipulating them by holding shelter, or their children. Like you can't see your children unless you go out and do this and bring back this money. Of course, then the use of force. So, that's really what we're talking about. And so that's why we're looking for victims who have been prostituted, because many times throughout their life, there has been numerous people who have exploited them in that way. And that's really what it is.
So, Philip, this term's come up several times, smuggling. And I know that a lot of times in the classes that even law enforcement, experienced law enforcement, are confused between smuggling and human trafficking. Clear that up for us.
Usually the smuggling is going to involve someone that's bringing an immigrant into this country from, whether it's the southern border or somewhere else. We'll get a call from someone that's working highway interdiction, and they'll say, well, we've stopped this vehicle and it has, a whole lot of people who are not U.S. citizens, and is this a human trafficking case? And we'll tell them, well, it might have been the start of a human trafficking case. They may be being brought here with a debt, and then they're going to have to work in a labor trafficking situation until the debt to their smugglers paid. Or if it's a woman, or in some cases even men, they may have to work in a sex trafficking capacity in order to pay their smuggling debt. We don't see that a whole lot, but it does happen. But as far as just the people that are getting stopped on the highway, or when it's just a group of people, that's really going to be more of the smuggling than the trafficking, at least at that point in the investigation.
Okay, thank you for that. So we've talked a lot about victims. We've talked about, the vulnerability, how that's such an issue, and that's often how traffickers prey on victims, is that they zero in on their vulnerability and then they use that against them. And then we also heard the 3 magic words. I was waiting on those 3 words. What are they? Force, fraud, and coercion. So, Philip, I'm going to pick on you just a minute again, and I want to talk about I want to switch gears a minute and talk about the traffickers. And then what do we call the people who are doing the purchasing?
So now there is labor trafficking, but in my specific job capacity, I mainly investigate sex trafficking, and we usually see that in two different forms, and that's familial sex trafficking, and then pimp control prostitution, which is trafficking. The first case that I got that was a familial sex trafficking case, it was a CPS tip that came in, and it was essentially describing a small Mississippi town family, and the allegation was that this teenage girl was being pimped by her grandmother. And I was very skeptical. Both of my grandmothers were just sweet Christian ladies. You know, they're always spoiling me, giving me something good to eat. I just thought, man, surely not. And started looking into it, and I ended up running the lady's criminal history and found out, wow, grandma has been arrested for prostitution herself. She's been arrested for, possession of crack cocaine. So the word grandma started taking on a different meaning in that particular situation. And investigation turned out, yes, in fact, this grandmother was profiting from selling her granddaughter. Then of course, the most common is, or at least the most common that gets reported, is your pimp controlled prostitution. And I talked about it some on the video. A lot of times it's men will meet a vulnerable woman or girl, and they will come across as a Romeo guy, and then once they have that girl, if she had a support system of any kind, once they have her isolated from that and under their control, or even controlled by a drug, then they flip the game on them, and it's now you have to do this to make money for me. You also mentioned the buyers. Wow. The buyers are everybody, unfortunately. We did an operation recently in Macomb, Mississippi, little bitty Macomb. In less than 24 hours, we arrested 10 men. They were respected business owners from other communities who had traveled there. We've arrested a college poetry professor before. We've arrested the president of a university. Now I've met men who we weren't arresting them, but in the course of talking about what I do, they disclosed. I've had a former sheriff disclose to me that he used to be a buyer. I had a former prosecutor disclose to me that in times past he had been a buyer. So it can really, buyers are in camouflage all through society. We've had members of the clergy who were arrested as buyers.
And we do know that 99% of the buyers are male, and as Philip pointed out, they're everywhere. And we talk a lot, and it's appropriate to bring this up in the church because the supply and demand thing deserves to be mentioned. If the demand were not there, we would not have the problem that we have. And so, that's something that's one of the reasons why, Pastor, it's important for the church to be involved, because, we really need to hold our communities accountable for recognizing, even among ourselves, who may be participating and involved in this illicit business. So, Casey, and before I dump a question on you, it's been a wonderful pleasure for me to have an attorney on the team. I call Casey a lot and give her assignments, and she's so smart and knows the law, and she's been super fun to have on the team. So, Casey, I just want to ask you, how is it that your training as an attorney, how has it informed your work?
Yes. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of our clients are going through legal issues, and I know that Sandy and Christina mentioned that too. So the criminal justice system is something that they're involved in. I would say the vast majority of our clients have, addiction issues. And we know that a lot of times the different crimes go along with that, right? People are out there stealing things to sell so that they can buy drugs. People are, sometimes they're homeless and they're trespassing on this property. Maybe they're participating in selling drugs. And for some reason that, I guess there's a few different reasons, but also our clients steal cars. I'm not sure why, but seems to be the favorite crime to be committed. And a lot of times it is, a lot of times it's a buyer's car that they say they were told they could borrow. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. Or sometimes they feel unsafe, right? Maybe that buyer did something, it made them feel safe. Maybe they were trying to get away from their trafficker in that moment, and they grab the car and they go. And then later they get arrested for that. We also, I have one client I'm thinking of right now who's been arrested multiple times for stealing a car, and every time she was arrested, there was always a guy in the passenger seat. Never the driver, right? Always in the passenger seat. And so a lot of times pimps will encourage the girls to steal the cars for different reasons. And, but the girl, I'm sure he got in trouble too, but she was the driver, right? And so we as an advocate, get to work closely with court systems and law enforcement, judges, public defenders to see, what is going on with this client legally. If they're willing to accept some help, will the justice system work with us? I had one minor client who had been homeless for years as a minor, and everybody pretty much knew about this person in their community. Before I met this client, I had nonprofits tell me about them. I'd had cops tell me about them, that there was this kid that lived out in the woods, and nobody cared. Like, people knew they were doing drugs, things like that. Nobody did anything. And then as soon as they turned 18, they started getting arrested, right? And I just thought, how is this happening to this kid that, you're about to maybe go to prison as the start of your life when you didn't really have much of a chance in the first 18 years, and nobody cared about you and people knew about you, and nobody intervened. And then now that you're an adult, let's throw you away, lock you up and throw away the key. And so for that client, we started immediately reaching out. We went to jail, met with them. We called the public defender to see what was going on their side. We called, narcotics cops down there to see what was going on with them. And we were able to work it out. We called judges, whatever it took, and we were able to work it out for the client to go to rehab and have a chance to get a new beginning, to do well. And some of the cops were like, you know what? If they graduate from rehab, I'll drop the charges. And that's what that person needed. They didn't need to sit in a jail cell. They didn't need to sit in prison. That wasn't going to help them recover from their trauma. It wasn't going to help them be a productive citizen. They needed, sometimes for these clients, I have multiple clients that's kind of their story or something very similar. And so for some of them, I always say, like, to the judge or something, thanks for giving them a second chance. But I often think, like, this is really their first chance because they grew up in terribly abusive homes. Some of them were homeless for years on their own. They have no, life skills to survive in our world. And then someone came along and exploited them in the midst of that. And so many of my clients, they don't, like I said, they don't want to remember. They don't want to be present when they're being trafficked. And so they're doing these drugs to, be able to not be there. And so I try to use my legal experience to know who to call and what to suggest. And honestly, so many of the cops, especially the ones that are trained in trafficking, are so willing to work with us to help people that are victims.
Okay, thank you, Casey. And she brought up something important, too, that I want to get into, and that's our kids. Several years ago, when we were looking at our legislation and trying to determine, what holes we needed to fill in and the things that we needed to change, one of the biggest burdens for us was the fact that our children were having to bear the punishment for the sins that were perpetrated against them. we believe that it's our responsibility as adults to protect our children. And that means that when somebody's exploiting them, whether it's through pornography, whether it's through sex trafficking, labor trafficking, whatever, it's our responsibility in a civilized society to protect our kids, right? And it was really shocking as we learned that so many children were going to juvenile detention centers on the back of crimes that were being committed to them. So just imagine that you were in the foster care system and somebody who was supposed to take care of you was actually molesting you or raping you or selling you. And then when you tried to run away from the problem, you got branded as a runaway, and then you got thrown in the juvenile detention center. That's what we're doing right now in the state of Mississippi. We are blaming our kids, we're punishing our kids, and we're creating this huge problem that just perpetuates the mental health issues that we talk about, the crime, a lot of the violence. And, so it's our position that we need to look at this issue from the other end and say, okay, this child is a victim, period. This child is a victim, and it's our responsibility not to necessarily give him a mental health diagnosis and give him a pill, but to sit with him or her in their trauma and find out what happened, why, what's going on. Nobody's asking those questions. Or when I say nobody, obviously some people are, but there's not enough people out there that are asking these questions. And then the other issue in our state is that there's nowhere for our kids to go. We talked about the tower, and that the tower is a place for adults, and our rapid response team assists, Christina, 20-something over the last few months? I think that's right. Right, 200 this year, children that our rapid response advocates have responded to. So, the problem is real, and we're grateful for our legislative leaders, Speaker Gunn, and we've already mentioned Attorney General Fitch, and we've got some real warriors at the Capitol that have worked to help us change what we're doing, our practices and our policies. But what we're going to have to do in our state is stand up a real system that protects our children. And, I love meeting with agency heads because, it's interesting to hear their perspective on it. But when you try to change a state agency or a big system, it's like turning around the Titanic sometimes. I mean, they're so big, and a lot of times money just goes in cracks. And, like a good friend of mine who's a conservative said, well, if you want to mess something up, give it to a state agency. So, and sadly, a lot of times that's true. But I want to delve into the kids and just talk a little bit about what we're seeing with our children, what we can do to make it better. And, y'all can mention the ACE study or whatever. And it's 7:40, so I want to maybe give each of y'all, 2 or 3, 4 minutes to talk. Let's just focus on our kids. So whoever wants to jump in first.
So I was shocked. This was a few years ago, but I had multiple kids I was trying to respond to and help. And they, sometimes would do different behaviors and get kicked out of a program if they were in one, or if they have certain, history of violence or mental health diagnoses, that sometimes places just won't take them, right? And there were some kids that were in CPS custody that they had called all across our whole state, and they could not find a single place for them to go. And so they were placed in hotel rooms with a babysitter service 24/7 for weeks. And that's just, they were living in hotels. And these are trafficking victims. Hotels are often very triggering for them. It wasn't in the best area of town. And, you know, it's a babysitter service. If that person decides to walk out the door, they're going to let them walk out the door. And that's what happened. One of the girls left. She invited the other girl to go with her. That girl happened to decline. And this girl was missing for weeks, and nobody knew where she was. And then the other girl ended up staying, but she was stuck there for weeks and weeks and weeks, to the point that I think she almost wished she had gone with the first girl. But I think a lot of us don't know that that's what it really looks like out there, that that's what's going on. We assume, okay, there's this kid, there's a program somewhere for them, and they'll go. And then there's other kids that I work with that are just kind of passed around from mental, facility to facility, and not actually getting help for the trauma that they've been through. And they're, just almost kind of institutionalized at this point. And it's sad because these kids are smart, they have potential, but they need that specific specialized help. And our state doesn't have anything specialized for our children. And as far as the crime part of what we're seeing, a lot of the younger kids are being trafficked by their own families or someone they know closely. A lot of times the family has drug addiction problems, and they've figured out that they can, exchange their kid, access to their kid for money or for drugs, and that's what they do. And then as the kids kind of get in their teen years, we're seeing more of the Romeo pimps, the boyfriends come in, and these kids don't feel loved by anyone. They don't have a support structure at all. And now some guy's liking your photos on the internet, and he's, messaging you when you had a bad day, and, he's posting all these flashy pictures of money and cars, and you have nothing. And he's promising you this amazing life. Like, he's going to get your nails done. He's going to get your hair done. He's going to help you become a star. You're going to go out to Vegas with him or whatever, and all these things. And they're not true, and these traffickers are so smart. I remember one time hearing someone say traffickers are dumb, and while they may not have, certain degrees or whatever else, they know human nature. And they could look out at us in this group now and, watch us as we interact with people, and they would be able to identify vulnerabilities that we have. They know out of a crowd of people who to go talk to, because they can spot who's lonely, who's vulnerable, who's insecure, who has a need, and that's what they do, and they're experts at that. But anyway, that was something that shocked me about our kids, just that they were stuck in hotel rooms.
Philip?
I guess the takeaway I would have with what I've seen with the kids is part of my investigation a lot of times is we seize cell phones or either from the traffickers, or sometimes we even get the victim's cell phone. We know there's going to be stuff on there that's evidentiary value. And then, a lot of these social media apps have a messaging component to them. So we'll end up, executing a search warrant to Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook. And so then I'm reading the messages on the text, on the social media messenger, and it's just over and over again. I see, some person that these people did not know is cold messaging them saying, hey, are you ready to take your life to the next level? Or sometimes it's just, hey, hey, beautiful, that just flattery. And I had a guy tell me, he said the first status that you have as soon as you're aware of statuses when you're a kid is your age, right? When you're 4, you want to be 5, and so forth. And a lot of the conflict that children who do have parents have with their parents is, the kids trying to do things that older people do, and the parents are, encouraging them to grow at an appropriate rate. And so then you see these messages that say something like, well, your parent is treating you like a child, and I would never treat you like a child. So they're going for that vulnerability, the child's pride or their desire to do things that their parents wouldn't let them do. But I remember Sandy posted something recently on social media talking about waiting until your kids are older to let them, be on social media, because and I'll tell you, there are apps that I've been on that they're not dark web, they're surface web, they're things you can download straight from the App Store, and they're anonymous, but they're based on location, so you see people that are close to you. Some of those apps, that's where pedophiles live. That's where pimps recruit. And I've seen horrible things that people think they're safe, and they just boldly post out there looking for kids because they think it's anonymous, and they think the only people that are going to be seeing it are they're downloading apps that are designed for teens and kids. So they think, they're the predator in the group. There's no parents on a kid app. So I would encourage parents, grandparents to limit your kids' social media. Try to keep them off of there until they're old enough and mature, and then continue to monitor it to make sure they're not being contacted by predatory individuals.
So that's been most of my cases in Meridian have been with kids, with teenagers. Some of them in the foster care system, some of them, maybe with grandma or aunt or uncle or something like that. But they are vulnerable just because of their age. Much of why Philip just explained. But I think the part, even though we don't house children in our shelter, we provide continued services and support services to children. And one of the biggest ways we do that is we stay connected. We answer that text message at 11 o'clock. We're checking in. We're kind of replacing a little bit of that predator, just caring about them. And, I drove over here one day just to take a girl to coffee. Like, let's just go get coffee. And we just walked around some lake. I don't know, it was a lake somewhere around here. Yeah, so we just walked.
You were probably trespassing.
Maybe so. But we just took a walk and had coffee, just that connection, being listened to, being seen about, like you matter, your needs matter. And I think that it's important to say that because this is something everybody can do. This is, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to come from Jackson, big capital city, to do this. This is something that you can do. You can connect with the kids in this church. You can connect with the kids at the schools in this area. You can see kids that, that you can start looking for those vulnerabilities and making that connection and just checking on them, and answering when they call you. It's important.
And that's a great segue. If I can get you to put up the screen that says what can you do. So, we've got about 10 minutes left, and one of the questions that we're always asked is, what can we do? How can we help? Christina, you want to talk a minute about how they can help with kids, what to do?
Yes, I cannot read that. I don't know how y'all stand up here.
You don't have to read that. I'm talking about how. I'm talking about how to.
Okay.
Call in a tip or something for a child.
Okay. That's actually on the next slide. Okay, this is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. This is how you could report any case of human trafficking. If you suspect a case of human trafficking, this is where you would call, text, or whatever that information, and then they would forward it to the appropriate agencies. You could also report it to the child abuse hotline if it's a child. So there's lots of different ways you can actually report that, or you could call Casey because you know her mom. Probably not a good idea. But because we are not investigators, so we're not the emergency responders. We respond either with law enforcement or after law enforcement has created a safe environment. So don't report to us.
Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. And this is our contact information. And I think if you go one more, there's go one more.
That's the end.
Oh, it is. Oh, yeah, you got to go back. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. So while we're changing screens, just let's talk just a second about what you can do. We talked about legislation. We talked about some of the things our state can do or needs to do. If you have contact with your elected officials, let them hear from you. If you have contact, like for example with A.G. Fitch or Speaker Gunn or the people who have been warriors for what we're doing, call them up and tell them thank you. Or, you know, poke the ones that are elected from here that come to Jackson and tell them, you know, we're watching you. We expect something to be done. This is wrong. We gotta do better. So that's one of the things you can do. And I'm about like Christina, I'm going to have to look. So follow us on social media. I know almost everybody's got their cell phone. We're easy to find on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. We're our website. And the good thing about following us and liking us on Facebook is that if you forget our phone number or you forget, you know, that hotline number, you can always go to your Facebook or social media and find that same information. So our handle is hashtag MSC4VP. Some of the things we need are donations. We're constantly needing some of the things that are listed. Volunteer, you know, we would love to have a point of contact in Meridian. It would be really great to have, you know, just some people to call if we got a transportation issue, or maybe our advocates are trying to tie two ends of a rope together and they just need to know, hey, where's a safe place in East Meridian where I can get this kid? So, you know, there's information like that, you know, that you could help provide as well. So we've got, what does that say, 7? So, Brother Pastor, do you want to allow a minute for questions, or are you ready to wrap it up? Does anybody have a question that we didn't cover? Uh-oh, here we go. We're off and running. Yeah, that's got your name all over it, Philip. He asked about gang connections.
Yeah, I would say the majority of the pimp-controlled victims, the pimp involved is going to be a gang member. There was I didn't read the research, but I saw it with my own eyes and saw it firsthand. A huge shift towards a lot of guys that used to primarily earn their criminal income through selling drugs were now also trying to sell women or children in these sex for money transactions. And kind of the theory was, if I'm a drug dealer and I'm driving and the police stop me and I have drugs in the car, well then I'm getting a possession charge, a possession with intent charge, maybe even a trafficking charge, a drug trafficking charge. If I get stopped and I have a woman in the car, as long as she keeps her mouth shut, I'm okay. And then also just the sheer economics of it. If I sell you some drugs, then I have to go get more drugs if I want to sell them to him. Whereas I could sell you and you and you and everyone the same woman over and over and over. So, but yeah, the gangs are heavily involved in sex trafficking.
And that's a good question too, because, you know, women and girls never rise to the upper echelons of gangs. They are always in a subservient role. They're either the mules for drugs, or, you know, they're stealing, or they're being trafficked. And so that's just the way it goes. Anybody else got a question?
When you say apps, you mean apps that parents and probably the worst app that I saw as far as for people trying to exploit children was an app called Whisper. That just evil things on that app, and just right there. And but that app was actually designed for adolescents when it was first created. But all of them, ma'am, I'm not familiar with that app specifically.
That's, you know, these traffickers they get into all of these games, like, you know, when our kids are doing the online gaming and things like that, there's always potential for somebody to contact a child during that online gaming experience. But you know, Snapchat, one of the reasons they like Snapchat is because they think it goes away. Of course, law enforcement has some tools to deal with that, but you know, just the apps that could be on your phone, that, you know, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Grindr,
I've even heard of people using the Bible app because it has a feature where you can friend people and you can send messages. I don't hear that frequently. I only heard that one time. But it just shows how any app that allows you to friend people and message could, you know, a predator can use.
And the campaign that Philip mentioned earlier was Wait Until 8th. And that's a big national movement that's going on to encourage parents to make their children wait until they're in the 8th grade to get a device, because they're just then old enough to really even start to understand the danger and the responsibility of being able to connect with anybody in the world. Any other question? Man, you got to love a Baptist church. What does that say? 758, Brother Pastor.
You say you don't really have anywhere for the children to go. So what happens to them? Besides the hotels, is there nowhere at all for them to go?
Well, that's what we kind of got into, that our rapid responders work real hard to find an appropriate place for them to go. Sometimes it's out of state. Sometimes we piecemeal something together to where maybe they go into a foster home, but our folks stay connected to them.
I wondered if DHS got involved when they're children.
Well, CPS, yes, ma'am, and that would take us another whole hour to get into that whole thing. But yes, CPS is by law involved if there are children involved.
Okay, I wanted to say one thing to y'all really quickly since we're almost out of time, but I once heard a survivor say that awareness is not prevention. And so often I feel like all the talks are about awareness, what is it? What does it look like? Now we all know, now everybody's safe, nobody will ever be trafficked. But people are trafficked because of their vulnerabilities. And if you had a single mom who lost her job and is now living in some cheap hotel, her money's about to run out, her kids have no food, and the traffickers and the victims live in these cheap hotels all the time, and they're gonna approach her because they see her vulnerable, and they're gonna say, I know a way you can make some fast money. A lot of my clients, that's how they were recruited. And so I feel like as the church, as the community, your job isn't just awareness, your job is prevention. And while that can be hard in a lot of ways, you're not gonna necessarily say, hey, this person's being trafficked, let me prevent it. It's not a kidnapping you're preventing, but it is knowing the single moms and making sure they have babysitters, making sure they have transportation to work. It is providing food for families and going out and finding the vulnerabilities and providing that love and support that trafficker is gonna fake provide. You can spot the vulnerable people too, and you can spot them, you know, before the trafficker if you're looking.
So I just want to thank y'all again for the opportunity, and again, we love that we're here in a church, and you know, we ask for your prayers to pray for the safety for all of us that are involved in this situation, and the victims, of course, at the top of the list, that they'd be able to find help and become survivors, but again, just to continue to lift up the movement, that, you know, we would continue to find out more answers and to provide more ways of hope and restoration for all age groups. And, you know, it's important to do that in the church. And, you know, as a daughter of a Baptist preacher, I mean, you know, this is where it's at. You know, the church is it's the home base for the community. And so, you know, what happens here goes out into the community, and you guys can affect a change. And so thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure, and I'll turn it over to you, preacher.
Well, on behalf of spend with us and share your experiences and share your stories. And, I thought I knew, but I learned quite a bit tonight. And so I just appreciate, especially at the end, what the heart was shared of. You can spot those vulnerabilities too, and church, we can be involved in helping in this thing. It's not just a, hey, got to protect me and mine. We need to be the hands and feet of Christ and look for opportunities. So, again, thank you guys so much. Miss Keisha is back at the table back there. As soon as I'm going to pray and dismiss us, and then if you want to ask some questions, get into some conversations, I'm sure you guys will be available for a little bit anyway. So, again, thank you. It is, we did live stream, and so if you want to go back and I need to listen to what they said in that it's going to be available, so you can find it on our Facebook page or our YouTube or webpage. Yeah. So, all right, let's pray. Father, we thank you for your presence, and God, I thank you. I thank you for what you have done, are doing, and will do through the Center for Violence Prevention and Law Enforcement Task Force is here in our state, but not just here in our state, God, all over our world. God, the problem is huge, but God, we want to celebrate those victories. And so, Lord, for those who have been rescued and been brought through the trauma, and now even sitting on the board, God, we praise your name for those victories. And God, I pray for grace and patience and strength for all of those who are daily in this fight. Lord, I know it is emotionally draining and physically draining, God, but I'm grateful. I'm grateful for people that are giving of themselves to make a difference. So, Lord, I thank you for them. And, Lord, I pray that you would raise up from those who have been in this place and watching online more individuals who will say, I can be a part of this fight. Lord, I pray you would help us here in our own city to be able to recognize vulnerable situations and be the church, be the hands and feet of Christ and come alongside, God. I pray that you would protect, that, God, you would be, especially with the victims, God, that are beaten down, abused sexually, physically, emotionally, mentally, that, God, you would be the restoring God that we know that you are. God, I pray that you would move mightily in a powerful way, God, through your church to make an impact on those who are the weak and powerless in our society. God, we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you so much.